Dear woman, your body is amazing. Let's see how amazing when we discuss the functions of the female reproductive system. Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Sexual and Reproductive Health Education on CASA Podcast, or CASA Talk Podcast. So, if you've watched my previous videos, you'd see that we've covered the vulva, which is the external genitalia, and we've covered the female reproductive system, which is the inside, right? The internal female reproductive system. So, today we are going to cover the functions, like what is the job, what do they do, right? We'll begin with the internal reproductive system, starting from the ovaries. Now, number one, the ovaries, if you can imagine, right, they're actually the size of an almond. That's how small they are. It's very tiny. Now, these ovaries have certain functions, certain jobs. I'm sure everybody knows that the ovaries produce ovum, the eggs, which are meant to be fertilized, right? However, another thing the ovary does is also responsible for the production of hormones. And there are two main hormones that the ovary actually produces, which are estrogen and progesterone. Now, these two hormones are responsible, right, for female development, the development of the female body. Yeah? It also influences the health of the heart, right, the liver, as well as the bones. These hormones are also responsible, rather they influence sleep, okay, as well as influencing sex drive. Now, from the ovaries, you go into the fallopian tubes, which are tubes that are hanging off the ovaries, okay? So these fallopian tubes are sort of like a tunnel. Yeah, they're a tunnel. So these tunnels are actually filled with little hairs that are called cilia. So when an egg is actually released into the fallopian tube, the cilia helps the egg actually travel along the fallopian tube all the way into the uterus. Now this travel actually takes up to 7 days. Okay? It's also helped along by a fluid as well. I'll find out the name of the fluid. Now, after the fallopian tube, you get to the uterus, which is sort of like the bedroom, right? The comfy, cushy bedroom. It is surrounded by walls. If you remember previously, I talked about the uterus walls, okay? So the internal part actually is the endometrium, okay? So the uterus wall actually thickens up in expecting the fertilization of an egg for implantation. Now, if there is no implantation, or if no egg is fertilized, then the uterine wall actually just it breaks down, and that's when you have like your menstrual cycle. Now, I forgot to mention that in the fallopian tube, that is actually where a majority of fertilization actually occurs, okay? But then the egg actually, comes down and implants in the uterus. Okay, so after the uterus, we now go down to the cervix. Now the cervix, as I said, if you remember earlier, it's sort of like it's a pathway as well, Now, the cervix actually produces a mucus-like fluid that actually blocks the uterus when someone is pregnant. And this mucus-like material actually also produces sort of like it's sort of like an antibacterial as well. It prevents bacteria from actually entering the uterus. It also helps with, the health of the vagina. Now, after the cervix, you now have the vagina, which again is also part of the internal reproductive system. So, the function of the vagina is, for sex, for sexual intercourse, right? That's the main purpose of the vagina. It is also a pathway for the baby to come out during labor, as well as the cervix, because the cervix actually contracts during labor. Oh, and another thing, hey, the hormones that are produced by the ovaries, they actually help or they influence contraction during labor. So that's why I say the woman's body is an amazing thing. As well as breast milk production. Going back to the functions of the hormones. Now that we are done with the internal part, let's get to the external part, which is the vulva. Okay, so I think of the vulva as a huge signaling, part of the body, right? Why do I say this? Because one, during arousal, or when a female is aroused, when the woman is aroused, the vulva becomes bigger, or rather, the part of the vulva, which is the labia minora and the labia majora, become swollen, engorged. English. So kind of grows in size, sort of like the penis, right? But we'll talk about the penis in the next episode. Now, as well as being engorged, right, the clitoris also does the same thing. They all get filled with blood and then they swell up in size, signaling arousal. Now, top to bottom. See, I keep saying top to bottom, right? Now, the clitoris is filled with thousands of nerve endings. So the clitoris is also sort of like a sensorial organ, right? Which is about pleasuring the female. Okay? Then, when you come down from the clitoris, you have the urethra opening, which the urethra opening is for the passage of urine, right? Now, the urethra is connected to the bladder. And right next to the urethra opening, there are two little glands. They are called skein glands. Now, these glands actually secrete a fluid which is an antibacterial, right? Which help fight and prevent infection around the vulva area. Okay? Now, when you go down, now you have the vagina opening, which is a passageway as well for penetration during sexual intercourse, and the exits during labor. So on the sides, both sides of the vagina opening, you also have two glands. Now, these glands are called the Bartholin glands, right? Bartholin glands. Now, these Bartholin glands also secrete fluids, which are sort of like lubrication, they are lubrication around the vulva, as well as lubrication, inside. So this helps during sexual intercourse. By the way, what I found out. Remember when I was asking why is the labia called lips? Turns out in Latin, lips is the word. Labia is translated as lips in Latin. So yeah, that's why. So I guess that's why it's called lips. We have come to the end of this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If there's anything I didn't cover, please let me know down in the comments. And I look forward to reading what you say and subscribing and liking. Thank you so much for listening to me today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.